Welcome to Murder with Friends, the show where two friends get together and talk about some of the darker sides to history. I'm your host, Grace Baldridge, and with me today is one of my closest friends, and you probably already know her from Pop Trigger if you're on this channel. Sam Shocker is in the Murder with Friends studio today.
I'm so happy to be here, even though we're talking about dark topics. I'm really excited to, first of all, see you in this light, because you're amazing. I'm your biggest fan, you know that. But also to talk about JonBenét Ramsey.
Yeah.
This is a case that has plagued you and I, and of course, millions of Americans and people all over the world. So we get to dive into it.
Yeah, and you know, when I thought of this show with Amir, when we were talking about it and workshopping it, I think one of the first cases I mentioned that I wanted to talk about was JonBenét Ramsey, because this is a case that there are no answers. And so therefore, you just want to learn as much as possible about it. And when we were talking about finally doing JonBenét Ramsey, the only person I could think to have on would be you.
Yes.
Because we've talked about these, cases before, just, as friends.
Right, exactly. We've gone on and on and on because it's true. I mean, an hour doesn't do it justice. And even when you do research the case, you find yourself already back at square one again. The more you learn about the case, the more you see that there are things that don't add up, no matter how much research that you do.
And another thing about this case is that we're talking about a girl who was murdered.
Right.
And you're
so sad.
one of the most compassionate people I know. And I think it's important that we're going to talk about this. We're friends. We're not investigators or detectives. And this isn't what that show is about.
Right.
But I think it's important to just be respectful to the fact that JonBenét her life was cut down at 6 years old. And we're just going to try and dive into what we know about this and why this has lingered in the public consciousness for as long as it has. If you could sum up the JonBenét Ramsey murder in just a couple sentences before we throw to a video, how would you describe it to someone who doesn't know anything about the case before?
That's tough. Well, for one, I would lead with absolutely horrific and brutal. A brutal murder, especially given that it's a 6-year-old girl. In a couple sentences, I would say many suspects, but conflicting theories, and many suspects, conflicting theories, brutal murder. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I would. Yeah. The only thing I would add to that would be beauty pageants.
Boom. Yeah.
Beauty pageants and murder.
Which adds to the eeriness of it. It really does, because when you see these documentaries, or when you're looking at footage of her, even just on the cover of magazines, and you see her in that light, there's something about a 6-year-old dressed that way, doing a beauty pageant, that adds to the unsettlingness of it all.
Yeah,
and it's hard to put your finger on why that is, but we should talk about that too.
Yeah. Let's get right into it, but first let's throw to a quick clip of what happened the night of the murder.
It happened in Boulder, Colorado, the day after Christmas, 1996. Shortly after she awoke at 5 a.m., Patsy Ramsey claimed she found a ransom note on her stairs.
911 emergency. We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay?
There's a note left in our daughter's door.
Police officers arrived at the Ramseys' upscale 6,800 square foot home at 5:52 a.m. Detectives waited with Patsy for the kidnappers to call. The phone never rang. At around 2 p.m., JonBenét's father, John, made a gruesome discovery.
The detective suggested, why don't you go look at everything? And so he went downstairs. One of the friends that had come to the house that morning was right behind him. That friend heard a loud scream and then saw John Ramsey running out of the room with his daughter's body.
So that's what happened leading up to the discovery of JonBenét's body, and we're going to get into a little bit of the evidence, but before we even get there, we need to talk about the Ramsey family, because this is a really interesting, affluent family. John and Patsy are the parents. John had a daughter from another marriage, but then the two kids that were in the house this night were JonBenét and Burke. And
9 years old.
9 years old at the time, so an older brother. And everything that we know about the Ramsey family is that they were really wealthy. They were members of the Boulder community. And also that they were, a little bit standoffish. We actually had a member of the crew, before we went to tape today, said that her mom was friends with Nancy, or
In college.
with Patsy.
We keep doing that.
We keep saying Nancy and Patsy.
I don't know why. We don't know who Nancy is. There's no Nancy.
We keep being like, Nancy was, and then we solved it.
Yeah.
No, there's no Nancy, but there definitely is a Patsy. And
Yes.
a member of our crew said before we went to tape that her mom was friends with Patsy back in the day, and that Patsy was a little bit of a gold digger, a little bit condescending.
Arrogant.
A little bit arrogant. What do you think about that? Do you think there's anything to that?
It's hard to say. You know, looking, I'll be honest, I say when I watched all those interviews, there was always something about Patsy that rubbed me the wrong way. Again, this is not fair of me to say this, because this is a woman who possibly, you know, lost her daughter or murdered her daughter. We don't know. But just giving her the benefit of the doubt, if this is somebody that just lost her daughter to a gruesome murder, who am I to judge how she's acting on camera? However, I can say how it makes me feel. There was a disconnect there, as opposed to John, the father. There was a disconnect when Patsy spoke, and then hearing a little bit of her background. You know, she was Miss West Virginia. That shouldn't impact the way I view her. But when I hear that coupled with some outside sources that have known her and said that she was arrogant and a gold digger and materialistic, and then you know that she was all into beauty pageants. She put her daughter at a very young age into beauty pageants, and then you watch her in her interviews. Something doesn't add up. And I have to touch on the fact, to piggyback, when you said that they were a standoffish family. That's true. Many people described them as that, except for in the public eye. Like, they would do these Christmas tours only because they would put it in the paper. And a Christmas tour is when, I wasn't familiar with a Christmas tour. We didn't have these in Santa Cruz where I grew up. But it's when, you know, a family will invite a town to their home for Christmas. So they put it in the paper to make themselves look good. 2,000 people went through their home. But then they weren't really connected to certain members of the community. It was more so for show.
I was going to say, it's safe to say that they were wealthy. He'd worked hard for his position at Access Graphics, that he was valued at, I think, like $6.5 million at the time of the murder, and they liked to show off. And there isn't anything inherently wrong with that, but given what we know about the family and the murder, you're right. It did rub the public the wrong way. And it's not fair of us to think that, but you can't help how you feel.
Exactly.
It was something unsettling. And speaking of unsettling family members of the Ramsey family, the son, Burke, recently went on Dr. Phil. And his interview has gone a little bit viral. Let's take a peek at him talking about his mother and growing up in the Ramsey household.
Did you do anything fun for Mom?
It's very clean.
Yeah. That's fun. Was your mom the kind of mom that gives lots of hugs and kisses?
Yep.
Both you and your sister, or just you, or just your sister?
Both of us.
Anybody else in your family? Are you going to talk?
This is on me.
What about you?
This is the first time you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
When you see that, do you remember it?
Yeah. I remember the room.
Yeah.
I think I didn't know it was a psychologist.
Did you consciously not draw JonBenét?
I don't really remember what was going through my head, but she was gone, so I didn't draw her.
Just creepy, right? And
Yeah.
I feel bad saying that, because I never initially, we're going to talk about theories later on, but I never initially thought Brock. Burke, sorry. Burke, Brock.
Burke,
Tomato,
Nancy,
tomato,
Patsy.
Nancy, Patsy. But I never thought Burke. And then I watched this interview, and again, it's not fair for me to say this, because this is perhaps the first time he's ever been, and I believe so. This is his first huge interview. It's on CBS. It's with Dr. Phil. He has cameras looking at him. There's producers in the room, so you can imagine he was feeling awkward, and you clearly see that with his awkward smile that he has. Here he's talking about his sister and a murder and where he was that day and the emotions that he had that day, and he has this odd smile and his eyes just don't look right. Something is not right, and that possibly could be an after effect from the trauma that he experienced growing up, losing his sister to a murder. So I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but you can't argue that interview makes you feel creepy.
His composure is very unsettling.
Yes.
There's something off about that.
Absolutely.
But then, you know, Dr. Phil said that, yeah, he's a little socially awkward. His life is very isolated. He works from home. And I probably would too.
Exactly.
That's what I was thinking when I'm watching this interview. If my life was his life, if we were to switch shoes, is that an expression?
Yeah, sure.
Switch
yes.
shoes,
I like
switch hats. That's when you know I'm foreign, when that stuff comes out. I'm like, when I put my shoes
Put someone
in,
else's shoes on.
That's it.
That's what you're trying to say.
When myself, if
Yes.
I were to steal his shoes,
Yes.
I probably would also be socially awkward. And I think that he didn't have any coaching before the interview. I think that that's really apparent.
Right.
And to an extent, I kind of like that. Because I think that what people didn't like about Patsy and John Ramsey is that they seemed very coached in their responses. And I actually have a clip of an interview with Barbara Walters that we're going to throw to right now about a little bit of that coaching. Let's take a look.
She was a ball of fire. She could stand on her head. She could hula hoop. She was an entertainer from the word go.
She was the spark plug in our family. That's how I looked at her.
You call JonBenét a 6-year-old Lolita a punch-sized sex kitten?
She kept things alive and going.
This looks perverted. There's just absolutely nothing wrong with it.
Woo!
Okay, so what I should...
Never has my dad ever called me a sex kitten.
Okay, here's what I should let you know about that clip. In my independent research, I spend a lot of time looking up JonBenét Ramsey on YouTube, and let me tell you that my search history has been really skewed as a result of that whenever I do one of these shows. I am not totally sure that that clip has not been altered, but I know that that is from the Barbara Walters interview that they sat down and talked with her about. And I think you still get a sense from that clip that there's a weird sort of coaching.
Right.
There's a little bit, they are almost too comfortable talking about this, you know, their daughter who was murdered and who the killer is still out there. And so I think that when I was looking at the Burke interview, I didn't like it. I didn't like his reaction to it, but it seemed oddly more authentic than what we see from them.
That's a really good point. I agree with you. And to bring it back to what you mentioned earlier in regard to Burke, again, he's not going to be normal. When you are looked at as a suspect at such a young age, even if he was cleared as a suspect, even if he wasn't even named as a suspect, your peers, your classmates, the people in your neighborhood are going to look at you that way. Even if it's just your parents are looked at as suspects, that's going to impact you. And it has impacted him. This is someone that works from home. This is someone that is a hermit. So he is socially awkward.
Yeah.
So we do need to be careful to not misjudge that, because immediately, when I saw that interview, I was like, oh God, he's got crazy eyes. He looks like he could be the killer. That's not fair. That's not fair.
Sam, you were like, murder solved. There we go. Amazing, Dr. Phil.
That's your initial gut reaction to just look at something on the surface without really trying to understand what that person has gone through and give them the benefit of the doubt and go, okay, maybe I would be that way too if I was upstairs in my room when my brother was murdered and then I had to reap, you know, for the next 20 years, I had to have people look at me and snicker at me and talk about me behind my back or my parents. So I want to give him the benefit of the doubt there.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, that wraps up what we're going to talk about with the Ramsey family. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the kidnapping and the murder of JonBenét. We'll be right back.